Awakening in oblivion. Darkness. The first sensation was pain, a sharp, searing ache running from the base of his skull down his spine, as if his brain had been scrambled. Dante opened his eyes. Everything was blurry. Harsh white lights beamed down from the ceiling, burning his vision. The rhythmic beeping of machines echoed in his ears, and the sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air. He was lying on a medical bed, sensors attached all over his body. He tried to move, but it felt as if an invisible force was weighing him down. What had happened? A figure approached, the blurry silhouette sharpening into focus. A woman in a medical coat, short silver hair framing a sharp, calculating face. "You're awake. Don't try to move too soon." Dante blinked, his mind still clouded. "Where am I?" The woman checked a scanner on her wrist, her voice calm but edged with tension. "You're in Omega 17 Military Medical Station. Your warship was lost in battle. You're the only survivor." The words echoed in his mind, but they meant nothing. Warship? He tried to remember. Nothing. Only a vast white void. It felt as if someone had erased a piece of him. The woman studied him carefully. "Do you remember who you are?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Dante Reyes, military pilot, Allied fleet. I remember myself." She noted something on her wrist device. "And your last mission?" Dante opened his mouth, but no words came out. A sharp pain lanced through his skull, as if his mind was desperately trying to retrieve memories that no longer existed. Flashes flickered through his mind. A battle, bursts of blinding light, his ship shaking violently, and a voice that felt familiar, yet he couldn't remember whose it was. "I don't know. I can't remember." The woman didn't look surprised. "That was expected. Don't worry, temporary memory loss after trauma is normal." Dante wasn't sure if she was telling the truth or simply trying to reassure him, but something in his gut told him that something was very, very wrong. Hours later, Dante was finally allowed to leave the medical bay. He stepped into the corridor of the station, still feeling slightly disoriented. Through the large observation windows, he saw a massive violet-blue planet hanging in the void of space. Warships of the Allied fleet were scattered across the orbit, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. Everything looked familiar. So why did he feel so lost? He stopped before an information terminal on the wall, its display listing the names of pilots who had been killed in recent battles. His fingers hovered over the screen as he scrolled through the list, searching for his own name. It wasn't there, but another name made his breath catch. Nova Rylis. No image, no details, just a name marked missing. He didn't know who she was, but as soon as he saw her name, something deep inside his chest twisted, like a shattered memory desperately trying to put itself back together. Something had been hidden from him, and he needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. Traces of a erased past, Dante stood frozen before the information screen, his eyes locked onto the name Nova Rylis. It didn't spark any clear memories, yet the dull ache in his mind told him she mattered. Turning sharply, he strode through the corridors of the medical station, heading straight for the data archive room. If her name was on the missing list, there had to be a record of her somewhere. The archive room was locked with high security clearance. He quickly scanned the area before inputting his access code. The door slid open. Inside, rows of screens flickered with constantly updating data. Wasting no time, he moved to the nearest console and typed in Nova Rylis. The screen responded with a cold, unyielding message. "Data erased." Dante narrowed his eyes. No photo, no past records, just a single note. "Missing in Operation Omega 5. No additional information available." His fists clenched. Someone had deliberately erased her existence, and that was all the proof he needed to know she was connected to him. Dante made his way to the pilot's lounge, where a few former squad mates sat drinking coffee and exchanging war stories. His eyes locked onto one of them, Troy Carter, a reckless, thrill-seeking pilot he remembered flying with. Troy glanced up, smirking. "Reyes! Heard you finally woke up. You had us worried there." Dante slid into the seat across from him, wasting no time. "Troy, I need to ask you about a name." Troy raised an eyebrow. "Shoot." Dante lowered his voice. Nova Rylis, do you know her? The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. For a split second, Troy went completely still. Then he let out a small chuckle, though the ease in his demeanor had vanished. Where did you hear that name? I found it on the missing list. Does she have anything to do with me? Troy took a slow sip of his coffee, placing the cup down carefully. Dante, I think you should stop looking into this. Dante's fist tightened. Why? Troy leaned back in his chair, exhaling. Because you don't remember her, do you? A chill ran down Dante's spine. What the hell are you talking about? Troy met his gaze, his expression unreadable. You loved her, Dante, but you chose to forget her. The words struck like a punch to the gut. Dante couldn't believe it. How could he forget someone if they truly mattered? He shot to his feet. I don't buy it. Someone erased my memories. Troy sighed, shaking his head. Maybe, maybe not. But I'll tell you one thing. He glanced around before lowering his voice to a whisper. She's not missing. She's hiding. Dante's pulse quickened. Do you know where she is? Troy gave him a dry smirk. Even if I did, you think I'd tell you? You think the government would just let you find her? Dante didn't care about the government. He wanted the truth. He needed to know why he forgot her. And he was going to find her, no matter what it took. A fated encounter. Dante left the lounge, his mind spinning. What had Troy just said? He had once loved Nova. He had chosen to forget her? That was impossible. He didn't believe it. Someone had manipulated his memories. Someone didn't want him to remember. But why? His feet moved on their own, leading him toward the engineering sector of the space station. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but instinct told him that something here would lead him to the truth. He passed through dimly lit hallways rarely used by pilots. The screens on the walls flickered with data, lists of ships destroyed in recent battles. And then he saw it, an old log entry, data from his ship on the day of the crash. Dante tapped the screen, pulling up a video feed from the cockpit. The footage was grainy, shaking violently from turbulence, but he could hear his own voice, and another voice. Dante, don't do this. If you go back, they'll kill us. He froze. The girl in the video. That voice echoed in his mind like a fragment of a dream. Nova. On the screen, his past self gritted his teeth, hands gripping the ship's controls in the middle of a desperate battle. I won't let them take you, Nova. The screen trembled. A bright flash of light erupted. Dante, no! Everything went black. The data was cut off. Dante stared at the screen, his breathing unsteady. This was proof. Nova had been on his ship that day. He hadn't chosen to forget her. Someone had made him forget. And at that moment, a familiar voice echoed from behind him. So, you finally remember. Dante spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his hip. A figure stood in the shadows of the engineering bay, the soft glow of the screen reflecting in her strikingly bright blue eyes. She was breathtakingly surreal. Silver-hued skin shimmering under the dim lights, long flowing hair cascading like a nebula over her shoulders. But the most terrifying thing? He knew her. Nova gazed at him, her expression unreadable, both distant and heartbreakingly familiar. You don't remember me, do you? Dante couldn't find the words. But one thing was certain. This woman had once been a part of him, and now she stood before him, waiting for him to remember. Stolen memories. Dante couldn't take his eyes off Nova. She stood there right in front of him, like a ghost from a past he couldn't remember. Nova watched him, her expression unreadable, a complicated mix of pain, hope, and deep sorrow. You don't remember me, do you? Dante opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wanted to say yes, wanted to say that she looked familiar, wanted to say that when he looked at her, something inside him screamed to be remembered. But his mind was blank. He shook his head. But I know something isn't right. Nova let out a dry chuckle. At least you realize that much. She stepped forward, slowly, cautiously. Dante instinctively stepped back. Nova stopped, hurt flickering in her eyes. You don't trust me, do you? Dante clenched his fists. It's not that I don't trust you. I just, I don't understand. If we knew each other, if we were important to each other, then why did I forget everything? Nova held his gaze for a long moment, then spoke in a quiet voice. Because they made you forget. Dante frowned. They? Nova's jaw tightened. The Alliance. They erased your memories. A cold chill ran down Dante's spine. He didn't want to believe it. He had served the Alliance for years. They were the ones who had saved him, trained him, made him an elite combat pilot. How could they do something like this to him? But if not them, then who else could have done it? Why would they do that? Nova hesitated as if debating whether to tell him the truth. Finally, she took a slow breath and said, because you betrayed them. Dante felt like the floor had just vanished beneath him. What? Nova met his eyes, unwavering. You chose me over them, and they couldn't let that happen. The words hit Dante like a strike to the chest. Him? Betray the Alliance? Impossible. He was a loyal pilot, a dedicated soldier. He couldn't have done that. And yet, why did it feel true? Dante shook his head. Number. That's impossible. I don't believe it. Nova narrowed her eyes. Then tell me, why is your memory missing? Why is my file erased from the system? Why won't anyone tell you about me? Dante had no answer. Nova stepped closer this time, and he didn't move away. She raised her hand to his temple. If you won't believe me, then let me show you. Before Dante could react, a silver glow radiated from her fingertips, and in an instant, his memories came flooding back. He saw himself in the cockpit, gripping the controls tightly, the screens reflecting his tense expression. A voice crackled over the comms, Nova's voice. Dante, they found us. We have to leave. Now. He remembered the tension, the anger that burned inside him when he realized the Alliance had betrayed them. A sharp command came through the radio. Reyes, surrender the alien prisoner immediately. This is your final order. Alien prisoner? He looked over to the co-pilot's seat, where Nova sat, restrained in a military containment suit. But there was no fear in her eyes, only trust. And he had made his choice. He hadn't turned her in. He had betrayed the Alliance. Dante gasped as he was pulled back into the present, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Nova lowered her hand, breathing heavily. You chose me, Dante, but they couldn't let you keep that memory, so they took it from you. Dante staggered back, his whole body trembling. He didn't want to believe it, but he had seen it. He had seen himself choosing to protect her. And now that memory had returned. But with it came a terrifying realization. The Alliance was hunting them both, and if they knew he had remembered, they wouldn't let him live. The Watchers. Dante stood frozen, his breath uneven, heart still racing from the memories that had just resurfaced. The fragments were beginning to fit together, but too many pieces were still missing. Nova studied him, a mix of relief and worry in her eyes. Do you remember everything? Dante clenched his fists, feeling the cold sweat trickle down his back. No, just parts of it, but enough to know that I've been lied to. He turned to her, a question burning in his mind. Why did I choose to betray the Alliance for you? Who were you to me? Nova gave a soft, almost melancholic smile. You loved me, Dante, and I loved you. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He didn't remember that love, but when he looked at her, he felt it, like a song he once knew but couldn't recall the lyrics to. Dante took a deep breath, his mind still spinning. But right now there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't trust the Alliance anymore. He needed to find the whole truth. But before he could say another word, Nova suddenly turned, eyes sharp. We're being watched. The air in the room shifted, becoming thick with tension. Dante's instincts kicked in immediately. He lowered his stance, moving toward the corner of the room, his hand reaching for the laser pistol at his side. Nova closed her eyes, focusing on the invisible energy signatures around them. There are at least 3 of them, 2 in the hallway, 1 in the surveillance room. Dante glanced toward the door. The Alliance? Possibly, but there's something off. One of them doesn't feel human. That was not something Dante wanted to hear. He scanned the room. There weren't many ways out. The engineering bay had only one main entrance. If they got pinned down here, they wouldn't stand a chance against a fully equipped strike team. Nova turned to him. "We need to leave the station, now." Dante tightened his grip on his weapon and nodded. "Fine. But first," he moved toward the control panel, quickly typing in a security override code. If someone was watching them through the cameras, he was about to make their job a lot harder. The screen flickered, then shut off. Nova raised an eyebrow. "Still remember how to disrupt their systems?" Dante smirked. "They erased my memory, not my skill set." She let out a quiet chuckle, but before either of them could relax, a faint click echoed from the hallway. The sound of a security lock being disengaged. Dante looked at Nova, motioning toward the far corner of the room where a maintenance hatch was partially open. They had to move. Now Dante pushed the hatch open, leading Nova into a narrow service corridor lined with energy conduits. The soft hum of power coursed through the station, casting eerie flickers of light along the walls. Nova frowned. "Where does this lead?" "The auxiliary docking bay." "You have a ship?" Dante shook his head. "Number, but I know how to take one." They moved quickly, weaving through the tight passageways. Behind them, footsteps echoed through the engineering bay. Their pursuers had entered the room. Dante glanced at Nova. "Are you armed?" Nova lifted her wrist, where a sleek, glowing blade extended from a concealed device. "Not enough to take down a strike team, but enough to make them bleed." Dante chuckled. "I forgot how terrifying you are." Nova smirked. "So do you remember me yet?" "Not entirely, but my survival instincts are screaming that you could kill me at any moment." She laughed softly, but the moment was short-lived as a sharp alarm blared through the station's comms. "Security lockdown initiated. Intruder alert in engineering sector. All units, prepare to intercept." Dante cursed under his breath. "They know!" They reached the docking bay, a vast hangar where several small scout ships were being prepped for departure. A handful of pilots and mechanics were scattered around, too busy with their own work to notice the two intruders. Dante pointed toward a compact recon vessel. "That's our ride." Nova eyed the ship. "You sure you can fly that?" Dante smirked. "I can fly anything." Nova shrugged. "Then what are we waiting for?" They sprinted toward the vessel, but just as they neared the boarding ramp, a voice called out behind them. "Drop your weapon, Dante Reyes." Dante froze. Slowly he turned around. Standing there was Commander Soren Voss, clad in the black combat armor of the Alliance. His piercing gray eyes locked onto Dante. Behind him, a full squad of special ops soldiers stood ready, their weapons aimed. Soren stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "You were given a chance to forget, but you chose to remember." Dante narrowed his eyes. "So it was you. You erased my memories." Soren didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at Nova, his expression laced with disdain. "She did well getting inside your head again." Nova smirked. "Thanks. I do my best work in breaking through thick skulls." Soren exhaled, almost disappointed. "Don't be foolish, Dante. You were given a new life, a chance to move forward. Why throw it all away for her?" Dante turned to Nova. She didn't need to say anything. He already knew the answer. He faced Soren again, standing tall. "Because I chose her once, and this time I won't let anyone take that choice away from me." Soren sighed. "Pity." He raised his hand. "Take them." The soldiers lifted their rifles. Dante looked at Nova. Nova looked at Dante. They didn't need words. They moved. Journey into the past. Dante and Nova moved in perfect sync the moment Soren gave the order. Dante grabbed a nearby fuel canister and hurled it toward the strike team. Nova instantly activated her energy blade, slashing through a control panel on the wall. A sudden explosion rocked the hangar, flooding the docking bay with blinding white light. Dante seized Nova's hand, pulling her toward the scout ship they had targeted. "Get on now!" Nova leaped into the rear cockpit while Dante sprinted for the pilot's seat. Alarms blared across the hangar as the strike team opened fire. Plasma rounds streaked through the air, exploding into bursts of energy just inches from them. Dante didn't waste time with a standard startup sequence. He bypassed all security protocols and forced the ship to launch immediately. The engines roared, blue energy igniting beneath the vessel. Nova turned back, spotting Soren advancing toward them. His expression remained disturbingly calm. He simply raised a hand, and suddenly a gravitational field locked around the ship, holding it in place. Nova's eyes narrowed. "He can do that?" Dante gritted his teeth. "Not for long." He pushed the engines to maximum thrust. The ship screamed in protest, shaking violently, but the invisible force held them down. Nova bit her lip, then placed her hand over the weapons panel. "You might want to brace yourself." Before Dante could react, Nova activated the ship's plasma cannons. Twin silver beams blasted from the vessel's sides, striking directly at Soren. He was forced to retreat. The moment the gravitational field wavered, Dante yanked the controls and the ship rocketed free from the docking bay at breakneck speed. They had escaped. The vast silence of space enveloped them as they accelerated to faster-than-light speed, leaving the station and Soren's forces far behind. Dante exhaled sharply, his pulse still racing. He turned back to Nova. "Didn't know you could shoot like that," Nova smirked. "Didn't you remember? I was a warrior long before I met you." Dante raised an eyebrow. "So, I fell in love with a warrior?" Nova met his gaze, something softer in her eyes. "You didn't just love a warrior. You loved me, even knowing it would cost you everything." A chill ran down Dante's spine. He wanted to remember. He needed to understand why he had chosen her over the Alliance. But there were still missing pieces. He glanced at the ship's nav display, where Nova had input new coordinates. "Where are we going?" Nova took a slow breath. "Verathis," Dante frowned. "Why Verathis?" Nova turned to him, her expression resolute. "Because there's something there that can restore all your memories." The planet Verathis loomed before them. Swirls of violet clouds churned in the atmosphere, casting an eerie glow over jagged mountain peaks that jutted through layers of thick mist. Below, bioluminescent forests stretched as far as the eye could see, their pale blue light pulsing like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Dante stared at the alien world. Something about it called to him, but he still couldn't remember why. Nova studied his face before speaking softly. "This place won't just help you recover your past." Dante looked at her. "Then what else?" Nova inhaled deeply. "It's also where everything began." The ship touched down in a secluded region, where ancient ruins lay scattered across the shores of a glowing lake. Dante stepped onto the cool, damp ground, inhaling the crisp air. The place felt familiar. But before he could ask Nova anything, a voice rang out from behind them. "I knew you'd come here." Dante spun around instantly, weapon drawn on instinct. Soren stood atop a stone outcrop, arms crossed. Behind him, a squad of heavily armed soldiers had already encircled them. Nova tensed. "Soren, you really won't stop, will you?" Soren smirked. "How could I let you recover his memories?" Dante's eyes darted around. They were surrounded. He muttered to Nova. "Do we have a backup plan?" Nova whispered back. "Do we ever?" Dante took a sharp breath. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't remember everything. But one thing was certain. He wouldn't let them take Nova. Not again. Soren raised a hand, signaling his soldiers to prepare their weapons. "This ends now." Dante's grip tightened around his pistol. He and Nova exchanged a single look. They both knew. This would be their final stand. The truth about erased memories. Soren gave the signal, and instantly plasma rifles powered up, red lights flickering ominously across the ruins. Dante and Nova stood trapped in the middle. Nowhere to run. Dante glanced at Nova. "Do we have a plan?" Nova inhaled sharply, her gaze locked onto Soren. "You need to remember. Right now." Dante froze. "What?" Nova didn't turn to him, but her voice became firm. "You've been in this situation before, and you won. But if you don't remember how you did it, we're going to die here." Dante clenched his jaw. He wanted to remember, but his mind was still locked behind an invisible wall. He couldn't recall how to defeat Soren. Soren saw the hesitation in Dante's eyes and smirked. "You won't be able to get it back, Reyes. The sooner you surrender, the easier this will be." Dante's fist tightened. He couldn't lose. Not now. Nova saw the internal struggle in him. She stepped forward, placing her hand gently behind his head. "Do you trust me?" Dante didn't hesitate. "Yes." Nova closed her eyes, and instantly, a surge of silver energy pulsed from her hand into his mind. And then, the memories shattered open. A battle in deep space. Dante in the cockpit of his fighter, Nova's ship trailing behind, hunted by the relentless forces of the Alliance. Nova's voice echoed through the comms. "We can't win this fight, Dante. We have to escape." Dante gritted his teeth, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Number. We don't run. We fight back." He engaged attack mode, maneuvering through the onslaught of plasma fire, evading deadly shots with impossible precision before retaliating with perfectly aimed blasts. Soren's face flickered onto his screen. "Reyes, this is your final warning. Hand her over, now." Dante didn't hesitate. "Go to hell." He cut the transmission, twisting his ship into a daring counterattack. Nova's face appeared on the display, eyes wide, searching his. "You're really willing to fight the entire Alliance for me?" Dante gave her a small smirk. "This isn't just about you, Nova. It's about my choice." He chose not to be a puppet of the Alliance. He chose freedom, and in that moment, a direct blast from Soren's ship struck his hull. Alarms blared, the cockpit shook violently. Nova's voice rang through the comms, filled with desperation. "Dante!" Darkness swallowed everything. Dante's eyes snapped open. All of it had returned. He turned to Nova, who was still standing in front of him, her gaze filled with anticipation. Dante took a deep breath. "I remember." He turned to face Soren. "And I won't let it happen again." Soren's expression darkened. "You can't defeat me, Reyes." Dante smirked. "I did it once, and now I'm going to do it again." Soren nodded once. "Then let's see you try." He raised his hand, signaling his soldiers to attack. But this time, Dante was ready. He wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was a man who had chosen to risk everything for love, and he would fight until the end. The battle for the truth. The moment Soren gave the command, streaks of red plasma fire erupted through the air, blasting toward Dante and Nova. Dante reacted instantly, pulling Nova behind a large stone slab in the ruins of the temple. "How much firepower do we have?" Nova quickly checked her wrist device. "Almost nothing. Just my energy blade and a small plasma pistol." Dante clenched his jaw. "Fantastic. What's plan B?" Nova glanced at him, smirking. "Same as last time?" Dante let out a dry laugh. "I just remembered that last time almost got me killed." Nova winked. "Then don't repeat your mistakes." Dante took a deep breath, then darted out of cover, firing at the advancing soldiers. His movements were swift, precise, using the terrain to his advantage. Nova followed closely, taking precise shots at their enemy's armor systems, causing interference in their energy shields. From a distance, Soren observed, his expression unreadable. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He still held the upper hand. And then he struck. Soren raised his hand, and a massive force field surged outward, sending both Dante and Nova crashing backward. Dante hit the stone wall hard, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Nova struggled to rise, but before she could react, Soren was already standing before her. "You've caused enough trouble, Nova." Nova clenched her fists, defiance burning in her eyes. "And you still think you've won, Soren?" He tilted his head slightly. "I don't think I know." Nova let out a soft chuckle, despite the blood at the edge of her lips. "Do you?" And in that instant, Dante surged forward from behind, clutching the crystal Nova had once given him. It flared to life, unleashing an enormous wave of energy. A brilliant silver explosion engulfed the area. Soren was thrown back, slamming hard against the ground. His soldiers staggered, their systems disrupted by the energy shockwave. Nova quickly pulled Dante to his feet, their eyes locking for a brief moment. "Now what?" Dante asked, breathless. Nova turned toward the temple's core, where the ancient memory restoration device pulsed with radiant energy. "We finish this." They sprinted inside, leaving Soren struggling to rise, fury burning in his gaze. Inside the temple, The memory restoration device stood at the heart of the chamber, its spinning rings emitting a blinding glow. Dante stared at it, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. He had come this far. He was moments away from remembering everything. Nova looked at him, then placed a hand on the control panel. "Are you sure?" Dante didn't hesitate. "Show me everything." Nova entered the activation sequence. Light erupted around them, and the final pieces of Dante's past came rushing back. A sacrifice to remember. Dante couldn't move. The silver light from the memory restoration device exploded, engulfing the entire chamber. It felt like a million shattered fragments inside his mind were finally piecing themselves together. Stolen memories surged through him. Too fast, too intense, drowning him in the past. He saw himself, seated in the cockpit, alarm sirens blaring throughout the control deck. In front of him, Nova was bound in a high-security containment device. Soren's face appeared on the communication screen, his voice cold and unyielding. "She is a threat, Dante. Hand her over immediately, or you will no longer be a part of the Alliance." But Dante didn't care about the Alliance. He cared about Nova. He remembered the way she looked at him through the glass of the cockpit. She didn't beg. She wasn't afraid. She simply trusted him. "If you do this, you'll lose everything," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Dante didn't even hesitate. "If I lose everything to keep you safe, then it's worth it." He severed the transmission with Soren, immediately steering the ship away from the battle zone. But he wasn't fast enough. A plasma shot from an Alliance warship struck the engine, sending violent tremors through the hull. Nova turned to him, regret clouding her eyes. "They won't let us escape, Dante. I can't let you die for me." He didn't let her finish. Activating the data transfer module, he uploaded all encrypted information from the ship into a small crystal. A crystal that Nova would later give back to him. "I won't let them take you, Nova. If I forget you, find me again." Nova opened her mouth to protest, but it was too late. Dante had already initiated the memory purge. The world blurred, the light faded, and he was back in the present. Dante gasped, his entire body trembling. He remembered everything. He had chosen to forget Nova, to protect her, but now they had found each other again. Nova stood there, the glow from the machine reflecting off her face. She didn't need to ask. She saw the answer in his eyes. "You remember." Dante took a deep breath, his voice firm. "I remember." But before another word could be spoken, an explosion rocked the entrance to the temple. Soren stepped through the ruined doorway, his eyes blazing with fury. "Did you really think you could escape?" Dante clenched his fists. He wasn't going to run anymore. This time, he would fight. The end or a new beginning? Dante no longer had any doubts. He remembered everything. The Alliance's betrayal. His decision to protect Nova. The reason he had willingly erased his own memories. And now Soren stood before him, ready to put an end to it all. Nova clutched Dante's arm, her breath unsteady. "We can't defeat him with force. He has an entire army." Dante glanced around. The corridor behind Soren was filled with special ops soldiers, their weapons locked onto him and Nova. There was no way out, not by conventional means, but he had no intention of running. Dante looked at Nova, then down at the crystal in his hand. It didn't just contain his memories. It contained classified data, everything the Alliance had done, including their manipulation of thousands of minds. He could use it. He could end this. Dante tilted his head slightly, his voice low but firm. "We're not going to defeat him. We're going to destroy what he's trying to protect." Nova blinked, then understood immediately. "Are you sure?" Dante nodded. "More than ever." Soren took a step forward, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Hand over the crystal, Reyes. You have no idea what you're meddling with." Dante smirked. "No, Soren. For the first time, I know exactly what I'm doing." With that, he tossed the crystal into the air and activated its transmission signal. A burst of silver-blue light erupted. All the data within the crystal began broadcasting across the galaxy. Every secret the Alliance had buried, every memory they had stolen, every experiment, every lie, every atrocity they had covered up. It was all being exposed. Soren froze. "No!" He lunged toward Dante, but Nova was faster. She raised her hand, releasing a pulse of energy that sent Soren crashing backward. His soldiers hesitated, panic setting in as their communication devices flooded with uncontrollable data streams. The Alliance was losing control. They could no longer suppress the truth. Soren staggered to his feet, but the fight had left his eyes. There was no rage anymore, only emptiness. You've destroyed everything. Dante stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. Number. I just gave the galaxy back the truth. Alarms blared across the sky. The Alliance warships began retreating. They knew they could no longer hide. They knew the world now knew. Nova exhaled sharply, her body trembling from exhaustion. Dante turned to her, resting a steady hand on her shoulder. We won. Nova looked up at him, her eyes gleaming with something he couldn't quite put into words. Number. We're just getting started. Hours later, Dante and Nova stood atop a ridge, watching as the last of the Alliance ships vanished beyond the horizon. She turned to him, her voice quiet as the wind. So what will you do now? Dante gazed up at the endless sky, where the stars shimmered like the memories he had finally reclaimed. He was no longer an Alliance pilot, no longer bound by their lies. He had chosen his own path. He turned to Nova, a slow smile forming at the corner of his lips. We have an entire galaxy to explore. Nova smiled back, nodding. Then let's go. They stepped onto their ship and left Verathis behind. No fixed destination, only freedom, only a future they would write for themselves.